Ever since the original Yuki Yuna as a Hero aired way back in 2014, I have absolutely loved this series. Now, unfortunately, I've had a lot of ups and downs for the adaptation for the series, mainly focused around what they choose to adapt and how they choose to adapt it. So it's no surprise that when the Great Mankai Chapter Season 3 came on, I immediately jumped onto the series. I absolutely love it so much. Anything that I can get of this world and these characters, I am just on top of it. But as mentioned before, it has a lot of ups and downs. So this is my review of the Great Mankai Chapter. I will say beforehand that we're going to get into some slight spoilers because it's difficult for me to talk about why I love the series and why I dislike the series without getting into some titles, some subjects, and some characters that technically will spoil certain concepts of the series as a whole. But with that said, this is my review of Yuki Yuna as a Hero, the Great Mankai Chapter, a 12-episode series that aired in the fall 2021 anime season. So let's jump into it. For those unfamiliar with Yuki Yuna as a Hero, the franchise, it essentially takes place on the island of Shikoku. And this is a secluded location that is currently being protected by a barrier, and it mainly focuses on a group of girls who are part of this hero club. And while they're out doing their usual club activities, where they typically will help volunteer with different groups, they find themselves transported into like an alternate reality where they're given power from this divine tree to fight against these vertexes that seek to damage the tree itself and harm the citizens of this area. And this expands as it goes along as you kind of meet different heroes that are assigned by the divine tree to fight against these vertexes and the unfortunate side effects that inflict them for fighting. The struggles they face, the burden of being a hero, and all these different elements come into play as the story unfolds. Now, some may argue against watching this series, and most of that kind of criticism comes around the idea that it has almost a feel of a dark magical girl like Madoka Magica. But I argued against a lot of those cases, whereas I love Madoka Magica for what it offers. Yuki Yuna as a Hero kind of offers a different perspective. A different cast of characters who suffer in a completely different way than what you kind of experience with Madoka Magica. A lot of the suffrage is through the inflictions that they face and also the public and how they view the heroes themselves. And this becomes even more apparent as we get into the Great Mankai Chapter. Whereas a lot of the first season was focused on this main cast of girls, the hero club, and their fighting against the Vertex, the second season changes its focus to some prequel stories, additionally to the final story. And then with the Great Mankai Chapter, unfortunately it jumps around quite a bit. And this is where we get into my first frustration that I have with the Great Mankai Chapter. Well, there was several arcs within this season that I absolutely loved and I just wanted more of. There was also a lot of arcs within this season that were kind of scattered around. What we end up finding is that the first episode of the third season is a kind of a snippet that was a story pre to the hero chapter that was in season 2. And then episode 2 through 4 was about these sentinels that again took place before the hero chapter that was in season 2. And then 5 through 8 was the origin story to everything. And then 9 through 11 was literally the hero chapter again. And then the final episode of this season was an after story. Again, the hero's annals and this final episode were amazing. I loved it to death. But at the same time, why tell it now? It becomes very clear that it seems like there's a lot of side stories that are within the universe of Yuki Yuna as a Hero that they kind of want to adapt. But the unfortunate thing that comes is that how they're placing them and what time they're adapting them is where it gets really confusing. I had several times at the beginning of the season where I just really didn't know where it was at. I didn't know what time frame we were looking at. And it wasn't until a lot of people that knew the source material were kind of pointing out where it was at that I could finally establish my placement in the timeline. Again, they're great stories, but when they should have been told was during season 2. So from a person that has not watched the series yet, this is great because now you know, before you watch the second half of season 2, you watch the Great Mankai Chapter. And then once you've watched most of this season, you watch the Hero Chapter and then watch the last episode of this season. Does it make sense? It doesn't. That's why it's confusing. So I definitely recommend to people that have not watched Yuki Yuna as a Hero as a whole, look online. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that will have some really fantastic breakdowns of what episode of which season you should watch first in chronological order. And I think when you have that perspective, this will be a great story. But for those that are like me that are now getting into season 3 after watching the first 2 seasons, this is a cluster. This is just a scattershot. With that said, I absolutely, like I said before, I wasn't a fan of the pre-story. I wasn't a fan of the Sentinels. I thought it was an interesting story. It gave us a perspective of essentially a failed project. But for me, the gem here was definitely the hero's annals. 5 through 8 was absolutely incredible. I just was like, okay, wow, we're getting the origin story. We're getting the actual year zero of this entire ordeal. And I loved it. Now, the unfortunate thing that came from it was that it was short. It was only 4 episodes. And the unfortunate side effect of that was that I noticed that there was a lot of little holes in the story itself. A lot of things felt rushed. They were introducing characters, having a lot of loss happen around the characters, and then we find out later that they were actually more closer than we originally hoped. And the issue with that was confirmed all the more by a lot of people that have read the source material claiming that they were skipping a lot of content, which boggled my mind because I felt like the Hero's Annals was probably one of the best stories of the series since the first season and the first half of the second season, in my opinion. And to have them really rush this content feels like a huge lost opportunity because I loved it. This concept of the effects of the social media, the effects of the public on the heroes themselves was a great story. This idea of the selfless heroes and the heroes that wanted more from the public. The heroes that felt like their sacrifice was unwanted. Their sacrifice was mocked by the public. And in a sense, it created a hero that went rogue. And I thought it was a really great idea. But unfortunately, a lot of the emotional impact is lost because we don't get a context to the characters and their relationships that were never established because they skipped it. Again, my frustration and my negative nature on this season is not because I don't love this show. I love Yuki Yuna as a hero. The problem is that I love it so much, I want it done justice. I want this to be a success, but it's hard to be a success when they fail to adapt it properly. I guess the only positive that really comes from this is that it's pushed me to want to check out the source material because I think that's the only way I'm going to get that true story. But unfortunately, most of it's been spoiled for me because I know what happens without the full context. Additionally to the Hero's Annal, the other fantastic thing that was given to us was this final episode. And I think the thing that we were kind of missing with the end of the Hero chapter with the second season was really an after story, an idea of what happens next, because it kind of leaves it as the dust of the battlefield settles. We get a mere minute or two of really getting an idea of what happened after the dust settles. But with this last episode, we get a full episode of really where the characters go from there, how they pick themselves up from the ground, how they see those that have been lost, and where do they go in the future. And I think that was a really fantastic, needed story that was finally given to us. But make no mistake, I suggest everybody check out Yuki Yuna as a hero. I think it's a phenomenal series that definitely does not have enough attention. It really does break my heart when I look into my anime list and other sources where I see the member list kind of just drop off really quickly after the second season. It really does seem like a lot of people are either disenfranchised or they've just forgotten about the series. We're talking about 7 years here since the original season came out, and a lot of people drop off from watching anime, typically within about 3 years if the research is correct. But fortunately for those that are new fans of anime, I think this is a great thing to go back and check out. But like I said before, definitely look online and find out exactly where the placement of each story is so that you can get a full context, a full chronological story, and not really get anything spoiled for you, while at the same time consuming the story as it should have been consumed, all in kind of natural order. There's so much good content here. I think this is a very unique and very interesting perspective of magical girls. Yes, technically a little bit more on the dark magical girls, but I think, like I said before, unlike things like Madoka Magica, where it's more dark in a sense of grim and suffering, whereas I think Yuki Yuna as a hero is more about human nature and the suffering in a more loss of dreams and ambitions due to the suffering that they face on the battlefield. But that's my thoughts on Yuki Yuna as a hero, the Great Mankai chapter. Like I said, I still suggest the entire series. I love it to death. I will always love Yuki Yuna as a hero. Again, my frustration is because I love it so much. I want it to be successful and I want it done justice. But if any of that sounds interesting to you, definitely check out the series. Let me know down in the comments down below if you're going to check it out. If you checked it out already, what's your thoughts? As always, subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video if you can. Support us on Patreon or through our tips link in the description below. We definitely appreciate everybody that does. And y'all take care.